All right, welcome back to part two of this episode of Don't Worry About the Government. My name is still Chris Novarino, still our champion, William West, but hot on his heels, as always, Finbar McLaughlin, closing the gap. Closing the gap. Um, in this segment, we are talking about Ukraine and this interesting and kind of sudden ramp up of intensity on the Ukraine-Russian border. This, of course, is a long-standing issue. I mean, this is actually something that we have been talking about on Don't Worry About the Government. I was poking around for a long time. There are a lot of episodes that are actually about Ukraine. Because if you go back, you have in 2013, McCain and Hillary Clinton and people involved in one of the color movements out in Ukraine at that time. Vladimir Putin was very unhappy with that. Some people believe that Putin would say that that is sort of like the reason why he has the ability to do what he is doing or whatever. Like that would be like sort of the Russian slant on these sorts of things. And then obviously during Trump's administration, the Russians decided that they were going to more or less lead an annexation of the Crimean Peninsula. And this is after funding like terrorist groups and paramilitary groups to create instability in the region. And basically, Russia has been meddling in the affairs of Ukraine. And Vladimir Putin has made it very clear that he feels like the reason he's justified doing this is that Ukraine is sort of let me to quote him. I want to make sure I get the quote right here. He says, what's your darn quote? He says, "One people, a single whole." In reference to Russia and Ukrainians, that like the essentially the dissolution of Ukraine from Russia was unjust. It was an error at the end of the Soviet Union, and Ukraine, I believe it means like the outer lands or whatever, and it used to be referred to as the Ukraine. And the reason Ukrainians are very not keen on that is the Ukraine implies the Ukraine of somewhere else, whereas
Yeah.
Ukraine
Yeah,
is Ukraine.
it's
Yeah.
Um,
the breadbasket of Europe.
yes.
It's the number one wheat producing area of the Central Steppe.
Interesting. I did not
Yeah.
know that. There you go. So there's a lot of points. It's actually a strategically important part of the world. As such, NATO has been openly courting Ukraine to enter NATO, and has sought to do that, and there have been conflicts inside of NATO and outside of NATO over that. Like not necessarily full on wars or whatever, but like like debates, and Ukraine has not yet joined NATO. I think I'd be interested to see where kind of the Ukraine discourse is on this at this point, because I think what they've been saying is, well, we don't want anyone meddling in our affairs. Totally reasonable. I think in a real world setting, Russia is not going to let that paradigm actually exist. So the question, I think, at some point is going to be Russia or NATO, and which way will Ukraine go on that front. Um, how is that in terms? Well, like actually, I guess I'll bring us up to modern day here, right?
Yeah.
So the point of conflict right now is that, and this is why it really is. It's not nothing. What Russia is trying to get out of this current round of, let's call them negotiations. I don't really even know what to refer to
Yeah.
this as. They are trying to extract a concession from NATO, that is essentially a ban of Ukraine from ever joining NATO, which would effectively be NATO recognizing tacitly that Ukraine is rightly part of Russia. So, like, this ask, one, it's not really particularly legitimate because it's not like Russia really has an affirmative right to ask for Ukraine to stay out of NATO. And two, if they actually get that, there's a second conceit that is being made there. A little bit of an okey doke, if you will, that Russia would be pulling off by getting Ukraine to never be eligible for NATO. And then lastly, I think it's pretty clear if that happened, Not today, not tomorrow, and probably not in the next 5 years because Russia will have set the table. But at some point in the next decade, Russia will clear the deck here, and Russia will reclaim Ukraine if they're allowed to
Mhm.
kind of finish off this plan, which would be Russia invading a sovereign nation,
Yeah.
which, by the way, they've already done before. The
Yeah.
historical parallels for that, I think,
When did
you
they
need to be a
invade
rank.
Georgia?
Oh yeah, well, wasn't
What was it, a couple years ago?
no, Georgia was what that's when
2012?
no, I think it was before that. That's when McCain said we're all Georgians now, and people were
Yeah.
confused by that because like there's actually a state Georgia here.
I know.
Yeah,
And I was like, good luck. They all got guns. Like, whatever.
no, because he said that,
2008.
it
was
really,
2008.
it hit more like a comedy line than it did
Yeah.
like. Also, it's like, I mean, sort of to America's chagrin, we don't know where Georgia is on a map. I'm talking about the state, let alone the country.
Yeah.
So, like, it's one of the closer ones. Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess with Russia pushing at Ukraine's borders, I guess a lot of because the Baltic states that are independent and have all more or less are all tied in much very closely with the EU, but and we would have a lot of immigration from a lot of the Baltic states, the ex-Russian, ex-USSR states that he's trying to push at all of those states, obviously trying to move back in. And so you wonder with the close ties he has with Belarus to the north and the west, in order to reclaim that whole buffer, Putin probably doesn't want to run Ukraine entirely, but to control it is what he wants. Not. I'm trying to remember who it was. Was the previous Paul Manafort's friend who had to do a runner?
That's right. Manafort and who's the other guy that Manafort ran with? But yeah, no.
Where he again Russian puppet, similar to the president of Belarus, and if he can't have those guys, then he'll just he would maybe do a short-term invasion, then agree to pull out on the basis of getting concessions, but.
Yeah.
No,
they want a puppet president. That Russia's preferred outcome. I had a Medvedev quote that I was trying to pull, like when you said that. I was like, no, I have a quote on that. You're totally right. Medvedev basically said, maybe the Ukrainian people will come to their senses and elect a new president who will be more in favor of this. Which, I mean, like, look, that tends to be Russia's preferred outcome. They like Trump. They like the Brexit votes. They like Marine Le Pen. And, like, they're not trying to conquer these places. They don't want to conquer them with boots on the ground if they don't have to. They prefer to posture and then sort of have control like they have with Belarus. The one point of intrigue here, though, is the Belarusian sort of wrinkle, because like now Russia is putting troops in Belarus and using Belarus as a staging area, and Lukashenko basically says that if Russia's involved, they will get involved. So there are some unfortunate echoes into the 20th century right now from, one, a repeated attempt to claim land space, and then two, allies sort of like maybe dragging themselves into conflicts.
Yeah, my worry, I mean, it just, I've done a lot of recent study on the Kievan Rus and the ancient sort of history of the different people of this area. And there's just an ancient desire for the northern tribes and of the Muscovites and stuff like that to sort of want to control Ukraine as well, like because a lot of their ancestor like kings are princes of Kiev and stuff, right? So they come from that area. There's like a big historical connection between that. So I always wonder if Putin just wants to like conquer Ukraine for the sake of like, taking it back for the motherland, but maybe that's a really dramatic like.
No, but I mean, I think it's subtextual, but to your point, from what little I understand of Russian culture, and I don't want to speak too out of school here, there is a bit of a cultural preference for the more European side of the continent, and Ukraine and reincorporating Ukraine would give them a broader profile into that edge of the culture. So you might be onto something there too. But I think a lot of this, honestly, for Putin specifically, it just goes back to him being ex-KGB and like all of our boomer era politicians basically trying to settle these stupid scores that they've never quite settled from like the 1980s and 1990s. Yeah, like that's what I feel like we the millennials are stuck watching right now. Is just like these boomers who won't let go, Stephen Breyer among them. Like still settling scores or living in that weird world. And I think Putin actually fits into that profile.
They do. I was going to say they're all, again, with the end of the Cold War, they've lost a lot of whatever stability in the world. I mean, so, like particularly if you compare to what Russian wants to do in terms of having been surrounded by puppet states with like the Monroe Doctrine in the Western sphere, by not making sure we don't have anybody we can't control, or why the United States doesn't have anybody too close that they can't control either,
Yeah, I mean, here's my thing though. As someone who's never actually had a problem with the Russians having this projection into Cuba, like this, like for me, the flip side of this coin is, well, I don't really, Chris, doesn't care about you guys being in Cuba and says that you guys totally have the right to do that. Or you have the right to have a Cuban ally. It does just because your ally is way across the sea and seems to only have one and only one strategic purpose for you. I'm still willing to grant you that. As a legitimate like point of, yeah, you're allowed to have that person as an ally. We're allowed to look askance at that. That's the rules of the road. Same way with Ukraine. Ukraine is allowed to be allies with whoever they want to be allies with, Russia or the United States, in my world. And like also on the flip side of that, neither country has the right to puppet manage them into this. Like if the Ukrainian people decide they want to be in NATO as a hedge against Russia and Russian encroachment that they have seen during their lifetimes, like in the last decade, they should have the right to do that, I think. I think that's sort of the price of it. I guess like what I'm troubled by, like now to kind of like go a little domestic here, is in like our particular tribe, like progressive and further left and that sort of thing, there's been a real short-term memory loss over just how like rotten Russia has been over the last decade. And it's not like you don't have to be a member of the resistance and like had voted like hard for Hillary Clinton in the primaries over Bernie Sanders and given to Hillary to see all of this. Like it's because it's bigger than the United States. Like to do that's actually American exceptionalism. Russia, as we mentioned before, had already tried to invade Crimea on really, really, really flimsy pretenses. Russia shot down the MH370 airliner. Like, yeah, they killed a bunch of people in that jet. Russia poisoned people on British soil using chemical weapons and didn't just get their targets. They also affected other people. Didn't care about that. Russia gave money into Brexit, probably changed the course of the United Kingdom in terms of where their economy is going right now. Russia was trying to finance Marine Le Pen in France. Russia certainly had active relations with Donald Trump, and I'm basically just using the Mueller report to point to that. I mean, the fact that Donald Trump was actively discussing with Vladimir Putin opening up a Trump Tower in Moscow as part of his 2016 campaign, that's documented in the Mueller report, speaks to just how deep the Russian relationship ran. Like, this is a malign actor that has been doing malign things. The cyber attacks. The GRU attacks, Cozy Bear, Fancy Bear, like the scanning of all the different power stations in the United States. I'm just doing these all off the top of my head too. Yeah. I know I'm missing stuff.
We had our health system was knocked out by Russian cyber attacks. Yeah.
That's right. So, I mean, this is a sustaining pattern of malign behavior, and so while I am anti-war, I'm also anti-getting punched in the face. And I think, if someone's punching you in the face, or let's not say these are punches. Let's say like sending in tanks and stuff are punches. Yeah. All these are little slaps. Screwing with the British health system can legitimately kill people. Shooting down a jet airliner, I mean, careful how much you just dismiss that one away. Think real hard about how lightly you want to take shooting down a jet airliner. Like, there are any number of malign actions that Russia has taken, and it troubles me that, yes, America's record in the world, particularly in the 20th century, is, let's be generous and call it a mixed bag trending towards negative in a lot of cases. That can be true. And we can also say things like America's current handling of COVID 19 is way, 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 way below optimal. It's really, 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 really bad. It's a bit of a non sequitur to even bring up, but we can acknowledge both of those things and also now pivot to Russia and go, these guys are bad. Like what they are doing is bad. And in this case, they're the initiator. And just because we're not great, you gotta sometimes scale it up against what you're up against.
Yeah, I know in Ireland, you were saying about on the left, we've had a lot of attacks against parties who have been really slow to take on Putin and to take on their activities. Particularly they're not the largest party, but they're the party that got the largest vote. They just didn't have they weren't set up properly to make the most of their vote, and but they get a lot of stick for just basically how slow they have been to take on the things that Russia does. Sort of a lot of the things that you've said, basically the general bad acting around the world.
We gotta have a better way to talk about this stuff. And this is not like necessarily a new talking point for me. I just feel like for years now, there are these bad actors in the world, and like our rightly held anti-bloodshed sort of like impulses keep us from necessarily reacting or necessarily processing that they're like people who are trying to draw blood. And sometimes you actually gotta like do something about that.
Yeah, actually, I think a lot of we were talking back to the books thing earlier on, and we're talking about this like the people who are going on about the books probably don't care about the books, but they're just purely talk. They're just things to use. Yeah. And what they do is they get their own folks excited and they annoy the people who are there against. And that's a win-win. They don't really care about the books. They go on to something else the next thing. It'll be the color of the stamp. There's a stamp with too much pink on it comes out and somebody will give out and it'll be whatever, stamp.
Well, LGBTQ, yeah.
Yes, too many, yeah. And, so because the fact is that things just move on, to the next thing that somebody will go and everyone's, whatever about owning the libs and all this sort of stuff. But it actually seems to drive an awful lot of media, and it seems to work for people, so in terms of getting them elected and keeping them elected,
Yeah, I saw someone comment on it that the politicians have unfortunately realized that they don't need to govern if they just post, and and I was like thinking about it, he was referring to like right wingers, but I was like, oh no, but that's increasingly true on our side. Like we don't actually. I mean, I love AOC. She is a poster. Like I would like a little less posting, a little bit more fighting, like in IRL. Bernie's increasingly become a Twitter presence, or like Bernie's Twitter account feels like more active than he is.
At least he's old though.
Right, no, Ditto, right. No, I'm with you.
He does have that,
like in this way,
there's
like,
a pandemic, and
you're right.
Old.
No, Bernie and Warren being posters, it's almost like you gotta love grandma and grandpa for being tech savvy. Yeah, but like AOC, you're not gonna give like, oh wow, it's great that a person my age knows how to use Twitter. No. So like, yeah, I just think we've got to have a better way of talking about Russia's aggressive behaviors and also China's aggressive behaviors. But at the same time, also being able to go like, well, China's doing malign things, and then when someone goes, yeah, they eat bats, you're like, no, you gotta stop. You gotta stop. That's the thing. Russia's a weird one though. Here's the thing I've been thinking about. What if Trump was still president? If all of this was happening right now and Trump was still president?
I think Putin would have already replaced the president in Ukraine.
Oh, he would have already
Yeah.
made the play. Yeah, because
Mm,
he would have known that the
yeah.
U.S. would not have had their
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I keep thinking too. Like
Yeah.
for this is not a great situation. Um, but I've been thinking that like if Trump was in office right now, Ukraine. I think what Putin would do would annex a decent chunk of it. He would do another bite. So
Mm,
now he'd be 2 bites in. And that
yeah.
basically 2 bites in without any real reprisal, and at that point you're basically saying we have the right to do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. I imagine he would move in far enough to actually join up with Crimea, to
Yeah,
basically to take out to have a link, a direct land link to the peninsula.
yeah,
A nice decent chunk. That's when you look at it, you say, well, that's obviously because that's where all the people that they're funding, that's where all the militias are that he's funding to fight government. But yeah, I don't. And again, yeah, it's probably Zelensky probably would have been poisoned with some of that whatever face melting poison that they use on the
it's
Ukrainians in the
amazing. Like
past.
this guy has no political experience. He was like on a television show
Yeah,
about a school teacher who became president and then became president in like the weirdest, most meta story of my lifetime.
yeah,
Um, and this guy has not been poisoned by the Russians,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
despite being involved in global intrigue time and again. Like a
You have to wait for
Vladimir
C.
Zelensky book would actually be pretty interesting, right?
Yeah.
Like you'd read that.
Mm. But I suppose that in Italy they've already had with the Five-Star movement. They've
Yes.
had similar comedian turns political leader, because his whatever attacks on government or his his because of his comedic work, the government is causing to come to the top.
Yeah.
And, so maybe it's maybe we're in for a whole essentially half a century of comedic leaders. Bring the fun back to politics.
Yes. Right. No, I mean, I think honestly, Joe Biden's going to make people want another fun guy. Trump might not
Yeah.
like Biden might actually be able to survive Trump, if Trump wins the nomination again. But like I've been thinking about this. Like
Mm,
him and Harris, I think now that people have gotten a taste of what like fun politics could theoretically be like, I think people are gonna want fun politics
mm,
more. I'm not saying I want that, but man, you look at where America's at. I mean, look at how we do music. Like American
mm.
Idol, is that about elevating great musicians, or is that about something or is that about something much more basal and stuff? It's no longer about
Yeah,
like what's the best type of music.
yeah,
It's
but
music is entertainment.
yeah, like I suppose I'm always whenever you look at say the Grammys, why did the same people win the Grammys? How can you have a country of 300 million people and one person walks away with 5 Grammys?
Yeah.
That's insane. That is
No,
like
it's
it's a nonsense.
and it's not the best type of politics. It's politics is entertainment. Like
Yeah.
that's what worries me. Is it's not about trying to achieve like platonic greatness in any of these crafts right now. It's just like,
Yeah.
can you show us something that amuses us? Like, yeah,
Mm.
music is amusement. Politics
Yeah.
as amusement. Yeah. Okay. Scale of 1 to 10. How likely do we think conflict with Russia is over this? And you can throw your number out and then clarify because the
I'm
number
gonna
is
be up
useless.
about yeah, I think about 6 or 7. A
Really?
little bit, a
Okay.
little bit slightly more likely of some. Well, when you say conflict, not necessarily with the United States, but with Ukraine, I think there's going to be military incursions at some point. But I just don't. I think that's more likely than not.
Where
Yeah,
are you at right now?
I'd probably agree with that, or maybe even say an 8. I mean, I just think that Putin's getting close to the end of his life. He had a pretty bad diagnosis medically. Like long term, it's not like going to happen soon or anything, but like he just, you know what I mean? He's getting old.
Yeah.
And if he wants this to happen, then he's going to need to take action.
So this is kind of like his last great move. Yeah,
Yeah.
like his legacy is he brought back Ukraine into Russia. Interesting. Interesting. I had this, I guess, leading into the show here, cards on the table, lower, 3 or 4. Weirdly enough, like when leftists have been like, this is a distraction in a weird way, I've sort of like been like, media loves these type of stories. I guess I don't buy that it's a distraction because it's like from what, like, and there's like no clear thing to distract from right now. I mean, no, COVID's not going great, but like it hasn't been going great, and also people are not nearly pissed off enough about it anyway. So I don't think like this is taking the edge off of that. I went into a man, people just aren't wearing masks anymore. I was gonna like name a place, but honestly, like I keep going into places like CVS, or it doesn't matter. And people aren't wearing masks anymore. They look at me weird when I have my N95 on. But that's not the distraction. Like, why you don't need a distraction if people aren't even wearing masks anymore. So I'm not there, but I just thought it was the chances were lower. This is all bluster. But then I'm like looking at the number of troops getting amassed on the border here. Belarus being like, I can't wait to get into this, sir. Please, Mr. Putin,
Yeah.
can't wait to pledge our allegiance to your government. And that like they're amassing along the Belarusian border. And you could totally see how this thing can spiderweb real quickly. Like it doesn't seem so. It doesn't seem so far-fetched that we could see a conflict over the Ukraine border that would essentially require international stepping in, because like at the end of the day, it's not like with Taiwan. I know that like people of our stripe don't like going to this place, but it's actually not okay. If you think that invading Iraq was wrong because it's not okay to invade a sovereign country, and
That's how I feel.
yeah,
That's what I was saying earlier with my friend. Like, so I had a friend who served in Afghanistan and Iraq and Iraq, and he's an officer. He wasn't like super high up. I think he got to the rank of captain. He was ROTC and everything, and but he did know like one of the presidents of Afghanistan at one point. You know, like he had done deal. You know what I mean? They just had
was he delivering briefcase full of money to him?
Who knows?
Yeah.
But he's very anti-war, of course. You know what I mean? Like his friends who he brought to my parents' house, and we took them to Titans games and stuff. They died. They're not here anymore. They died in Iraq and Afghanistan. You know, and I was just surprised. We were talking about it yesterday, and I was just surprised that he was sort of blaming us for Russia's push. And I guess there is an argument there, right? I mean, we've had a lot of meddling there, and we do provoke them to a degree, but I think this is something that Russia just would want to do anyway.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the push business, the complaints about the push are all just made. A lot of them are just made up. They've been set up to be created as an excuse, and we hear them all. It's like when Ukraine was gave up all its nuclear weapons, was given guarantees of independence from Russia and from the United States for giving up their weapons, and immediately Russia starts involving itself in their affairs. And a region, ignores the fact that they're not meant to be doing it.
Man, so that never gets brought up in the nuclearization debate, and that's a real interesting one. That's a real interesting counterexample, right? So you got Ukraine to give up their nuclear weapons, and what happened? They became a bit of a bastard state that's now getting fought over. Why does North Korea want nuclear weapons? Huh?
Yeah.
No, it makes some sense.
And
sorry.
so basically, so that Russia, and are now saying, oh well, this is you trying to move in here. But if you look at where Ukraine is, I mean, it's a nice place to have a little base if you wanted to, but there's no way. It's sandwiched between so many countries that are not, great friends of the West. So
it's like silly, right? Do we really think that the West is getting ready to invade Russia? I mean, even if we were gonna have a base there, that's not like the prelude to war. Yes, America in the 21st century is going to project power all the way across continental Europe to stage a war in Russia, just to prove that they can do what the 20th century couldn't, which is invade and conquer Russia.
Yeah. I know, especially now. It seems that if you knock out a couple of power stations in Kazakhstan, you can disable Bitcoin.
Yeah, I was just saying, like if anything, like if you take out Bitcoin and you're going after the heart of Russia. It seems like these days. So yeah, like I think there's so many things about the Russian position on this that they really beg your belief when you really think about them. Like there's just no credibility here. Yes, I'm sympathetic to no, we shouldn't invade Russia, but no one's talking about that. No one has been talking about that. It's been going the other direction. And I'm with you, man. Like as someone who grew up in the Iraq War, and my lesson that I took away from the Iraq War is you don't actually have the right to invade a sovereign country. honestly, what I wish is that more people had told the United States no
Mm.
when we were invading Iraq.
Yeah.
That you don't have the right to do this, and
Yeah.
that the pushback against us has been more forceful. And I don't see. I guess even more, it's more inexcusable now for the rest of the world to be ambivalent in the wake of our mistake.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess so. It's actually one thing that when you mentioned invasion of Iraq and that, one of the things I don't know if you listen to the Dan Carlin thing about the Japanese in the Second World War in his hardcore histories, and one of the things he talked about was prior to the war, essentially Japan entered into a number of conflicts, but won them all, and became essentially, essentially as they expanded their empire, it becomes more hungry, and you become addicted to expanding.
Yeah.
You can't just sort of do a bit and stop and then say, oh, that's grand, that's all we need, because you never need enough. If you're bent on expansion, then that's all you can do until you start to contract again. So you're either winning or you're losing.
Right, right.
So
Something has to push you back, and so
yeah.
like that's the problem with expansionist.
Mm.
Essentially, with expansionist countries, at some point there needs to be pushback against them. And this has been true all throughout history.
Yeah, so and I think it like that, where if you want to project power, you always got to keep on projecting that power in that respect. So with Russia, whether it's if they think they can project it easily, they're in a light way in the background, they can. If they can't, then they've got to try and do it some way. And so this is version 3 or 4 of their attempt to project into Ukraine. And maybe this is the point to say, well, we can't go back. Maybe they just said they have to just roll the dice on this one.
Yeah, it seems like, given the amount of troops they put on the border now, a de-escalation would be hard for them to even do, because it would look like them backing down, and it would feel like a loss. Like that, they're not going to de-escalate unless. I think they made it pretty clear they're not going to take the troops off the border unless they get the concession from the West that they basically won the fight here. Like the West gets to save face and spin this as a win, and they get to take the W. I just don't think. I don't think the U.S. broad foreign policy establishment, because it's interesting. You're not seeing any daylight right now between the Democrats and the Republicans on this. I don't think they're going to let them do that. I really don't. And frankly, I think the rest of the NATO signatories are probably not going to let them do that either.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things that when Belarus redirected the Ryanair airline in order to take dissidents off the plane, the reporter off the plane, then so ever since then they've been banned from European airspace. Belarusian airlines, so no airlines are allowed to fly to them from European. So Belarus itself has been pushed more and more essentially into the hands of Russia, and there has been no, and they haven't sort of apologized, or they haven't let up. So they've stood up against those kind of things. So it is a thing whereby the kind of sanctions go so far, but you run out when, if you do all the things that you think will work monetarily, and then they stop working, then what do you do next?
Right. I mean, because like the big thing that the West wants to do right now is sort of find a way around the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and basically get Germany to not be so mixed bag on this, because they're like, the Germany situation is very much like the junkie who knows better but is actually really addicted. And so it's like, no, I know he's bad, but yeah. And like now everyone's like, well, we're not going to get Germany off the gas, but we need to get them another dealer. At least then we might be able to get something out of Germany.
Yeah, I think the problem we have in Europe as well is that since Fukushima, all the Germany says we're getting out of the business of nuclear, and in reality, for most green people are saying that nuclear is the way a lot of states have to go. If you want to go green, you've got to use this as an intermediate phase. And because they've said we're not doing that after Fukushima, and also fracking is banned most of Europe. So we don't have the access to shale gas, the poison gas. We're still sort of stuck. Now we have some gas here, and we have huge capacity ourselves in Ireland, but the rest of Europe, they're stuck. If they don't have nuclear, they have to use gas. They
And
really
not
don't have to.
necessarily enough solar to really, solar's only semi-viable.
Yeah. So solar's only set. Yeah. I mean, we're okay for wind, and Spain is
Wind,
pretty
right?
good with
Yeah.
wind. So we have I was looking at it there, and I think something like it's either 45 or 55% of our power comes from renewables, predominantly wind, with a certain amount of hydro and a few other things like that, and a bit
Yeah.
of solar. Well, obviously, we have very little solar
Yeah.
going
Right.
on.
Right. Right. No.
Hey,
It's
good
so
luck.
like.
Good luck getting that.
Right. No, those are the challenge. Those are a strategic challenge energy wise for Europe. Like they need to make the green transition almost more urgently than any other part of the planet.
Yeah.
And they also have fewer options on that front.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think that's a good place to leave Ukraine. Let's swing back around here and do Breyer, the Supreme Court, and we'll talk about Neil Young and be rocking in the free world. Come and rock with us in part 3.